You admitted why. You gave your reasons why. Because the leadership whipped you to death, and you bled, and you cried, and you said, Mr. Leader, I'm with you.
It's often said that politics is a stage for conflict.
Chair didn't hear the gentleman from Louisiana.
As we saw last time, pure conflict can be analyzed mathematically as a game, where the participants are thought of as players with diametrically opposing goals. Game theory helps us to identify which strategies players should use and what outcomes will result.
Freeze or cut defense spending.
In the U.S. Congress, conflict over legislation and appropriations pits Democrats against Republicans. But there are plenty of cases where cooperation is the best route to a mutually satisfying outcome. Experienced political opponents routinely agree to vote for each other's bill as a way to build support for both. In this political game, we find a mix of competition and cooperation, what we call a game of partial conflict.
In textiles, we're very concerned. We have no objection. We certainly would accept it over here.
And the same is true in business. Every year, the National Forest Service sells 65% of its potential forest growth to private lumber companies. Companies are invited to submit bids, and contracts go to the highest bidder. In this sense, the logging business is strictly competitive. But if you look further, it's not that simple. The same companies that compete for contracts also cooperate with each other for mutual benefit. For instance, many of them belong to associations, such as the American Forest Wood Association and the Timberland Owners Association, through which they can get lower workers' compensation rates than they could individually. In fact, pure competition is pretty rare.
And now, the prisoner's dilemma.
District Attorney's Office.
Bob.
Oh, how you doing, Bob? It's good to hear from you.
What you working on?
I'm working on that bank robbery.
2 prisoners were arrested last night for robbing the First National Bank. Because the evidence against them is only circumstantial, the DA is hoping to extract a confession. The suspects are being held without bail in separate cells. The game they are forced to play is the prisoner's dilemma.
Just be glad you're on my side.
Rona and Colin will have to choose between loyalty to each other and making a deal with the DA. They are trapped in a game of partial conflict.
So that's it. That's the way it stands.
Yeah, I'm confused here. You're talking about helping me. How are you going to help me?
I can't help you on the concealed weapons charge. I'd like to, but I can't. You're gonna do time for that.
Okay, they don't throw you in for life or concealed weapon.
Yeah, but I'm offering you a better out, though.
But I gotta squeal on my old man.
You've had a good life. And then you meet a bum like him.
Look, lay off him, okay? Just lay off him. I don't want to hear you talk no more about it.
Look, let's talk about you. A nice lady like yourself. This is your first time here, right?
Yeah, you know it is.
Do you like it here?
No, it stinks.
Do you need this aggravation?
No.
You're a smart girl. Very smart.
Yeah, I figured out what you're trying to tell me here.
You went out. I can help you, but you've got to work with me.
What do you mean, work with you?
I can get you out tomorrow. If you do just one thing, give me Colin.
Colin's my buddy. He's my old man. I can't turn him in.
I can see how you feel about him, but you've got to start thinking about yourself. I'd hate to see it end like this.
Well, it ain't ending so fast, so don't go rushing things.
You're facing a concealed weapons charge. I can get you off, but you've got to talk. And I'll tell you one thing, you don't have much time.
Individually, each prisoner has a strong incentive to squeal. So the DA has it made, because the most likely outcome is they'll both squeal. That leads to the unfortunate result, at least from the prisoner's point of view, that they convict each other. Narrow self-interest leads each to squeal, but if both do, both are penalized. In terms of the game matrix, the prisoners have two strategies: to squeal or to keep silent. If they both talk, they both get convicted.
Colin. Colin.
What do you want?
Sit up when I'm talking to you. Good work on the bank job, Colin. You really botched it.
I didn't botch no bank job. If I was to pull a bank job, I wouldn't botch it.
You botched it. You're here, aren't you?
I'm here because of a misunderstanding. You got some business with me or something?
You might say. I'm sending you up the river. We've got you on a concealed weapons charge. There's no way out. All the evidence points to you.
You ain't got nothing on me.
You seem kind of desperate.
I don't get desperate.
Look, you are going to jail. I can do a lot for you, Colin. If you help me, if we help each other, even a loser like you can have someone influential on their side. By the time I get through with you, you will definitely need me.
Oh, I'm scared. I'm scared. You see my hands shake?
Yeah. This is how it goes. Do you want out of that concealed weapons charge? What do you say?
You got a cigarette?
I want you to tell me how Rona is involved in this.
You want me to squeal on Rona? Is that what you're saying?
She's nothing to you, buddy.
How do you know she's nothing to me? Look, I don't squeal. Colin, don't squeal. It's something I never do.
Colin, everybody knows you're the mastermind behind this deal. You've got the record, you've got the motive, and you've got the means for this type of operation, and you can't get out of it. Rona knows it too. Rona knows you're right.
You've been talking to Rona? Have you been talking to Rona? Look, Rona don't know nothing, okay? You got any talking to do, you talk to me like you're doing now. Just leave her out of this, okay?
She's involved in it, because if she talks, you get sent up the river, and she gets out. Let me spell it out for you. Sit down. You don't talk. You've got some time coming for that concealed weapons charge. If you don't talk, and Rona does, you've got a lot more time coming. But if you do talk and send Rona up, you get off scot-free.
Let's look at the game, first from Colin's point of view. We'll use numbers to represent Colin's relative preferences. The larger the number, the more that outcome is preferred. He most prefers to get off free, which happens when he squeals and Rona doesn't. So this outcome is assigned a 5. His second preference is the outcome that results from loyalty, the light sentence if they both keep silent. This receives a 3. The next to worst outcome for Colin is the steeper jail sentence that results when both confess. This gets a 1. And the worst outcome is called the sucker's payoff, 0, the severe sentence that comes from keeping quiet when his partner squeals.
She could squeal on me. She would squeal on me. She might squeal on me. Go run off with the DA of the Bahamas or something. Rona.
Oh, this is awful. I mean, I never thought I was the type who would squeal on someone, man. I wouldn't tell on him, you know, like, because, I wouldn't do that. Oh. But I gotta think of myself. I gotta think of myself here. I can't be thinking about him. Is he thinking about me?
Now we have to add Rona's payoffs to the game.
I don't know what he's thinking.
In the zero-sum games we studied last time, this step wasn't necessary. Whatever the payoff to the column player, the row player received the opposite payoff. But the prisoner's dilemma is a game of partial conflict, and so the payoffs to the two players do not sum to 0. Like Colin, Rona's first choice is to go free. In the game matrix, that means she most prefers this outcome, which is Colin's last choice. So each outcome in the matrix will now contain 2 payoffs, the first belonging to the row player, the second to the column player. The complete matrix shows that 2 outcomes are mirror images of each other. That is, when Rona gets the best payoff, being set free, Colin gets the worst, a severe sentence, and vice versa. The two players' preferences coincide at the other two outcomes. Both prefer the light sentence that results from mutual silence to the severe sentence that results from mutual betrayal. In game theory terms, loyalty is an example of a general strategy called cooperation, and squealing is an example of what's called defection. So for our prisoners, the cooperative strategy is to keep quiet, and the defection strategy is to squeal. Now that we have the matrix all laid out, what should the players do? Well, in Rona's case, we can see that the payoffs for squealing are higher than the payoffs for keeping silent, no matter what Colin does. If Colin confesses, then squealing gets Rona 1 instead of 0. If Colin keeps silent, then squealing gets Rona 5 instead of 3. The strategy to squeal dominates the strategy to keep silent. No matter what Colin does, Rona will always do better to squeal. And Colin, the same holds true for him. No matter what Rona does, Colin's payoffs for squealing are higher than his payoffs for keeping quiet. Again, Colin's strategy of defection dominates his cooperative strategy. But if both players choose to defect, both do worse than if they cooperate. Now we can see the dilemma graphically, and there doesn't seem to be a way out. The prisoner's dilemma is intriguing because it crops up in so many situations. Whenever you're caught between the desire to cooperate and the temptation to defect. This dilemma is at the root of the most intractable problem of our time, the arms race. Since the first atom bomb test in 1945, the superpowers have developed the ability to destroy the world many times over. Despite this, each side continues to invest billions of dollars in weapons. Both NATO and the Warsaw Pact want to have a military advantage. Yet the continued escalation of arms results not in advantage for either side, but in each side spending more for the same relative power that it had before. This deadlock is a perfect example of a prisoner's dilemma game. The players in this game are the East and the West. Each player has two strategies to choose from, either to continue the arms race or to slow it down. Now, everybody would agree that a global reduction of the current arms buildup would be a good thing. But remember, a game can only represent the interests of the individual players. And when it comes down to it, each player must make a strategic decision independently. The best outcome for each player is to be able to build up arms while the other side slows down. The second best outcome is when both players slow down. The next worst, when both continue to arm. And from the point of view of either side, the worst outcome is to slow down or stop arming while the other continues to build. Now, if both sides could cooperate, they'd do better than if they both defect. But just as before, the strategy of defection, building up arms production, is dominant for each player and must be considered the best individual choice of action. Mutual defection is therefore not the worst individual outcome for either player. However, you can easily imagine situations where mutual defection is the worst outcome for both players. These situations can be modeled as a game called chicken.
Wait a minute, we're wasting time with the turkey.
The game gets its name from a rather gruesome ritual enacted by California teenagers in the 50s. As two drivers approach each other head-on at high speeds, each has two choices: to swerve or to drive straight on. There are four possible outcomes. The player who drives straight on when the other swerves gets the highest payoff, 5, for his courage. The player who chickens out by swerving while the other stays on course gets the second worst payoff of 1. If both swerve, they both lose prestige, but not as much as if only one chickens out, thus a payoff of 3. And if both drive straight on, The result is disastrous, and incidentally, deadly. They both received the worst payoff, 0. Now, chicken is a game of confrontation. 2 players standing eyeball to eyeball, each determined to make the other blink first. To give you a sense of the tension that accompanies an actual play of the game, I'm going to demonstrate chicken again, this time with real cars. Of course, I'll need a crash helmet. A crash helmet? Hey, Joe, wait a minute. We talked about this. There's no way I'm crashing real cars on this show, Joe.
What's going on out there? I'll talk to him.
So, you know, this whole series is about practical applications. We gotta show people what chicken is really like.
That's fine, Joe. You show him. There's no way. I don't care how practical you want me to be. I'm not crashing cars.
Saul, trust me, baby. This scene can make your career. Look what this scene did for James Dean.
Yeah, I ain't got to worry about my career. Look where James Dean is today. Joe, I'm not crashing cars.
Saul, you'll love it when you see the car I have got outside for you. A 52 T-Bird convertible.
Joe, I don't care if you got me a Rolls Royce. You don't pay me enough to crash real cars. You hardly pay me enough to even play with these toy cars.
Saul, you know the kind of budget we have in public television. I'm paying you $100 for this show.
Joe, I know my rights. I know my contract. You want me to crash real cars? You got to give me some more money.
Saul, unless you get in that car outside, this show is not going to go on.
Joe, unless you pay me some more money, I walk.
Due to circumstances beyond our control, this program is temporarily interrupted. Please stand by. The problem is that neither the producer nor the host is willing to back away from their determination to win this game. They have therefore brought themselves to the mutually worst outcome, the 0-0 payoff in chicken. Neither player is willing to blink. This is a classic example of the game of chicken, as it occurs in labor negotiations. If the producer won't back down, he'll have to carry out his threat to end the show.
Look, I talked to the unit manager. I can offer you a raise, but this is it.
If the star doesn't back down, he'll have to carry out his threat to go on strike.
Are you kidding? For that much money, I wouldn't even drive a car, let alone crash one.
This is the worst outcome for both players. The host doesn't get paid, and the producer doesn't have a program.
Look, forget the car. Here's a couple of bucks. Try this on.
Okay, but let's make it fast. It's hot in this thing.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to announce that the players have negotiated a compromise. We now rejoin, for all practical purposes, in progress.
But there is some resemblance between chicken and prisoner's dilemma. In both games, each player can get a higher individual payoff by defecting from the cooperative outcome. But if both players defect, both do worse. The difference between the games is that in chicken, the lowest preference of both players is at the same outcome. But in prisoner's dilemma, that's not true. When one player gets his lowest payoff, the other player gets his highest. It's a subtle but important distinction. In fact, the order in which preferences are ranked actually determines what game you're playing. So far, we've been looking at Prisoner's Dilemma and Chicken as one-shot games. But if you think about it, that's not very realistic. The United States arms policy, for example, is not a one-time decision. The process is ongoing. Let's say both East and West recognize that cooperation is more advantageous than mutual defection. They make a treaty to slow down the arms race. But since either player can change strategies at any time, this agreement is unstable. There's always a temptation to move unilaterally to build up arms production, the strategy that yields the highest individual payoff. So what's necessary for a long-term arms treaty is a way to stabilize cooperation when the prisoner's dilemma game is repeated over time. This issue of cooperation in the repeated prisoner's dilemma is the subject of Professor Robert Axelrod's research at the University of Michigan.
They play the game over and over. They have arms budgets every year, and they know the experience that they have. And they relate to each other. They know they're going to be there next year and the year after, and they've been there for a while, so that it's not just a one-shot game. And that opens up all kinds of interesting possibilities that are fun to explore. So who would like to try their hand at this? Good.
In the repeated prisoner's dilemma, the strategies and payoffs are the same. But this time, the play will extend for many rounds. And now each player's goal is to accumulate as many points as possible. A regular C will stand for cooperating, a backward C for defecting. They sound the same when the chalk hits the blackboard.
Okay, so why don't you write down your first choice, and we'll see what you do. Aha! You both defected. Okay, now what you should do is copy over the other person's choice, right, and put down the score. Okay. And let's see what your second choice is then. So Bill cooperated.
Right.
And Don defected. Don't look at the other side while you're moving now. Aha. You both defected. Aha. You both defected again. Defected again. Thought about that, but they both defected again. They defected again. These guys are tough.
Time out. Professor Axelrod talks to each player separately.
He's been defecting each time, so if I cooperate, I'm going to lose. Get 0. And he hasn't cooperated at all, so it's not in my interest to try and to think he might cooperate.
No, I think I blew it. I think I really blew it already.
And you think it's hopeless now?
Is it hopeless now?
Yeah. Because we're going to play.
No, as a matter of fact, I think the smartest thing for me to do would be to cooperate and possibly take 2 losses, 3 losses, and then maybe he would see that I was willing to not be so cynical, and that together we could both win.
So both players suspect they'd do better if they cooperate.
Gee, they stopped and take a look. They both cooperated.
But it's hard to resist the instinct to beat the other guy.
Are we going to be playing further?
Well, tell us what you would do. Let's see. I'm not sure.
Well, I was starting to get greedy. I started thinking to myself after that third three-pointer that right about now, he's expecting me to cooperate continually. I'd like to know when our last round is going to be so that I can stick the knife in and get my last 5 points.
If you knew just when it would end. But, of course, if you didn't know exactly when it was going to end, it'd be a little more complicated. How many points
After 15 rounds, the players are both averaging 2 points per move. How does this stack up?
Well, actually, I could tell you from experience, this is the worst I've ever seen. I hate to tell you that. It usually is a little above 2, but not much. 2 1/4, 2 1/2, something in there.
Mixing cooperation and defection randomly, neither player had a true strategy. Professor Axelrod explains the problem.
The fact that you don't have a standard of reference, really, means that what you tend to do is use the other player's score as a standard of reference, which they were both talking about. I want to do better than the other guy, even though it's not necessarily appropriate. But you're kind of searching because you're in a new environment, in a situation where you don't have any kind of real grounding, so you look for some standard of reference.
What kind of strategy will produce better scores in a repeated prisoner's dilemma? Professor Axelrod decided to find out. He conducted a computer tournament to test prisoner's dilemma strategies. 62 experts submitted all kinds of strategies, ranging from total defection to some very complicated rules.
I was really surprised by the way it came out, because the simplest of all the rules submitted was the one that did best. That was tit for tat, which is the rule submitted by Anatol Rappaport. And it's the rule that simply says cooperate in the first move, and then do whatever the other player did on the previous move. So if the other player cooperated, you cooperate. If the other player defected, you defect. And that worked out better than all the very complicated rules that use very sophisticated schemes.
Back in the classroom, player 2 begins to discover the tit-for-tat strategy. When player 1 defects, player 2 responds with a defection on the next move. This is the completed game, and player 2's last move is here. From this point on, player 2 echoed each move by player 1. This tit-for-tat strategy encouraged player 1 to cooperate.
People are looking for ways in which cooperation can occur even though everyone is an egoist, even though everybody's looking out for themselves. How could you possibly get cooperation going? And I think people are sensitive to the problem, especially in the nuclear world, that this is an essential feature that we somehow have to recognize, that it's not a zero-sum game. It's not a situation in the world today where one side could win and the other side is a total loser, but rather we somehow have to get along with each other.
What does this all add up to? We've suggested that game theory is a tool that can help us to understand conflict and cooperation in a wide range of decision-making situations. Decision-making is what really underlies everything we've been talking about. Voting systems, measurements of power, and the analysis of strategies are all part of making decisions for groups and for individuals. Now, decision-making is usually considered an art, and it will probably always remain so. But the new mathematics of social choice and game theory is making our understanding of the decision-making process more subtle and more powerful. From Arrow's impossibility theorem on voting to von Neumann's minimax theorem of games, mathematicians are providing fresh, remarkable, and provocative insights into the very human problems of making decisions.